Well, I want to thank you for joining us. I know it's late morning out west and it's early afternoon here on the East Coast, but I thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Schumacher. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Home Furnishings Association, and today's webinar is as timely as they all have been. This one is really focusing on human resource questions around bringing your employees back. There's so many complications, and we're going to try to get as much as we can today. Before I introduce our guests, I want to mention to you a couple of things. First of all, this is being recorded. So if you want to share this webinar with anybody, you'll be getting, as part of your sign up for this webinar, you'll be getting information on where that link is to find the recording, and you'll be able to enjoy that. Also, we have 4 handouts for you today. If you look on the right side of your screen, you're going to see that there are handouts that you can download. These are very valuable downloads. A couple of them are fact sheets revolving around FFCRA, which is, of course, the Family's First Coronavirus Recovery Act. Also, we have a return to work planning guide and the safety of your employees template, which all can be very, very helpful. And before we start, remember, our guests are here. They're not giving any kind of advice that you can walk into a courtroom with. So that's the disclaimer. This is just advice and conversation. Let's talk about who I got today. A couple of familiar faces to many of you. We've got Eric Martin joining us from Tucson, Arizona, senior consultant for ACG Consulting, and Eric has joined us numerous times. Also, we have Pascal Benyamini. He is a partner at Faegre Drinker, Biddle and Reef. Say that fast 4 times, and I will challenge you. His law practice is in labor and employment, and he's also, by the way, the vice president of the California Furniture Manufacturers Association. So he's very connected to our industry. So gentlemen, first, it's great to have you here. We've already gotten a ton of questions in, and we're encouraging people to send more. But what we're really going to be working our way through today is how to bring employees back. Once they're back, what if they get sick? What if they have fears of COVID? Let's talk about sick leave. We're going to talk about having them wear masks, all these sorts of things. But before we get to the questions and I start rolling that way, let me open it up. Eric, I want you to start briefly. Can you give us an idea about really, to give us the pulse of what you're hearing as an HR consultant and professional as far as from this retail world, to kind of give us an idea about kind of the hot topics that you're hearing, and then we'll pass it over to Pascal to do the same.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon to everyone. A lot of calls in the last couple of weeks, which is great news to me, that everybody's talking about return to work and getting back into the workplace. And they're being very mindful of asking the right questions about government compliance and regulations, which seem to be changing on almost a daily basis sometimes, as well as employee relations, as well as, you know, all their communications. And they just want to do the right thing, and they just want to get back to work, quite simply. I'm encouraged by the number of calls and by the number of people getting ready to go back to work, and we're ready.
Okay, Pascal, what about you? Pascal, can you hear us? Well, we might have lost him. Well, we'll work to get him back in a moment. Pascal, do you hear us? Hello.
I can hear you now. Yes. Sorry.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. No. What are the things that you're hearing? The calls that you're getting before we get into the question and answer here. What are the hot topics or comments that you're hearing from people that are calling you for counsel?
So unfortunately, I'm still getting a lot of calls about furloughs and layoffs, and those are with the more difficult discussions with clients. But as Eric mentioned, I enjoy hearing about some clients that are starting to get back to the new normal, particularly in our industry. There was a debate over the last month and a half or so whether or not the furniture industry is an essential business or not. Some have been, some have not been, but there's a lot of confusion around paid sick leave and how it interacts with the state paid sick leave, local paid sick leaves, and the FFCRA. That is kind of a maze to navigate around. A lot of issues with respect to workers who are not complying with the social distancing and wearing masks, and actually some clients are calling with people faking that they're not sick. They're actually sick, but they want to come to work anyway. So I have to deal with that as well. So those are the type of things that I'm seeing right now.
Wow, we'll get to that one a little bit later. That one is kind of mind-boggling. But gentlemen, let's get started in this way. I have a ton of questions already, and there's more coming in. But I think this first one, it's a good place to start. What would you say? And again, everything we're talking about is from a human resources employee standpoint. What do you think the three most important things that a business should consider as they're reopening when it comes to this particular part of their world? What do you think the top three would be? Eric, why don't you start with that?
Well, first, I'd recommend that they remain mindful of state and local regulations, and in a lot of cases, county. So county, municipality, depending on what your city, what the mayor, what the county board of supervisors, and what the state wants to do, I would highly recommend that businesses take a look on a daily basis. And they reach out to their resources to find out what any updates are, because those are going to prevail. The next is, I strongly encourage everybody to have a plan. And this plan is going to change. This plan is going to have to be, I think the key word is flexibility, quite honestly. I explained to all clients that they've got to remain flexible, because things are going to change as we learn more about the virus, as we learn more about the numbers, as the government changes, what their position is. And then lastly, to practice everything that Cal OSHA or Fed OSHA for the rest of the country has mandated in terms of safety, and to maintain a healthy and safe work environment for their employees.
Okay. Yes, Pascal, what do you think? What are the three keys that people need to be thinking about as they reopen?
One big ticket for me is whether or not employers are going to do any sort of screening procedures for employees to get back to work, whether it's temperature checks or some kind of a health screening before the employees are allowed back into the business. This is true also for customers. I'm hearing that some visitors to businesses are also being tested before they can enter the premises. The third thing is, particularly in retail, is to have proper dividers. For example, if you've been to any major retail store these days, including your local grocery store, you'll see a plexiglass that has been erected at the cashier stand. Those are the type of reconfiguration that employers may be thinking about in terms of the safety aspect of getting back to work.
So you're basically saying with the screening and everything else, get back to kind of what Eric just talked about. You have to have a plan. This is not an ad hoc thing. This is not wait and see how it goes. This is have a specific plan in place. Now that's important, obviously from an optics standpoint, but we're talking to you guys, say from an HR standpoint. Is this a way of trying to lower your exposure and liability?
Absolutely, in my view, yes, because in my view, if you follow governmental regulations regarding everything you can do in order to maintain a safe workplace, you avoid the risks that may come associated with that for various claims. But at the same time, you may have a plan today, as Eric mentioned. That plan may be changing tomorrow based on various government orders that may come out. For example, in California, the governor's order is still in place through May 15. But some businesses, particularly in the furniture industry, have been given some leeway of opening county by county. So you may be open today, but you don't know what the governor is going to issue on May 15 or May 18 or May 16 about what the business needs to do in order to open. So the plan you may have today may need to be revised in very short order.
So that's that flexibility that Eric was talking about. And I think that the one thing we need to mention, if people listening are not familiar with, is that these FAQs that come out related to any of these laws that have been enacted, those have the power of law, correct? I mean, those change the rules can change while we're moving along here. And I think people need to realize, is that the issue that you're saying, Eric, with the flexibility? They have to understand that it can change tomorrow?
Absolutely. We've seen it sort of the last 6-7 weeks. We've seen Department of Labor at the federal level, as well as all the way down, like the agencies that I mentioned. And a lot of these rules, it gets rather complicated. It goes into Americans with Disability. It goes into, many different aspects of the legal side. I'm trying to keep it simple for the clients, quite honestly, with all the calls coming in. And again, it relates back to, like Pascal was saying, I completely agree that if you follow, especially OSHA's recommended, and OSHA's put out a plethora of information, and I'll give them credit where credit's due, because it's actually been fairly easy to read for the layman. And it's very straightforward. And I mean, they just put out a publication as an example that is not just the legal side, but the recommendations. And we'll talk about it more in a little bit, but we've got people coming back, but they've got childcare issues. So OSHA issued a bulletin yesterday afternoon, for example, that is all about, because they've got to make the consideration for opening childcare facilities. So there's a lot of helpful information, but I say follow the line with the recommendations from the government, regulatory aspect. It's going to go a long ways to help protect you and minimize exposure, I think.
Okay, so we put those things in place. We've got our plan. We've got everything laid out. Now we're trying to bring employees back. And this has been just so spotty all over the country. So let's talk a little bit about this. This is a common question. We've got a ton of them here that say, I've offered somebody a job and they don't want to come back because they want to stay on unemployment longer. How do you properly handle that? What are your rights as that business owner in dealing with somebody that refuses?
Pascal, you want to field that one?
I'll be happy to. So if the person is saying, I don't want to come back because I'm not comfortable in coming back, to me, that's not a valid excuse. If they say, I'm not coming back because I have an underlying medical condition, I'm at risk, or my doctor has said that I should stay home, then that triggers the potential paid sick leave reasons under the FFCRA. And I recommend to clients that they be flexible with their employees, because it's possible that the one employee that says, I'm not comfortable coming back, may be one of their best talents. So they have to look at the situation, evaluate it, and make a common sense, take a common sense approach.
So let me just get this straight then. So I offer the job for somebody to come back and they say I'm not comfortable, but it doesn't meet those other requirements you're talking about, that I'm at risk. I'm just not comfortable, or I just want to stay out longer. So me as the business owner, I have the ability then to say, well, I'm going to take that as a resignation and move on. What are my options here? How can I handle that? Eric, you want to take that one?
Sure. It depends on the circumstances, which are going to be individual. It also depends on the state. Texas, I will use as an example. They earlier this week issued some guidelines that are updated for unemployment insurance benefits. However, they rule that that's not going to be a right to a job protection. They followed up the next day because they probably got a lot of calls. I will share that I've had clients call and they tell me that they've asked people to come back to work and they've been told flat out that I'm making too much money on unemployment, so I want to stay home. For those individuals, like Pascal said, my advice is that's unacceptable. It doesn't qualify under any eligibility under the Families First or FFCRA at all. Especially if and I highly recommend businesses bringing people back, go ahead and generate an offer letter to people that you want to call back. Because during this time, whether you've been completely closed or working on a work from home basis, you've thought about what your staffing needs are going to be. You've thought about who you want to call back. You generate an offer letter so that you can prove that you're offering bona fide, you're offering them employment. No questions. If the job has changed at all, because sometimes jobs are going to change, we're going to consolidate job duties. We are going to maybe give them, maybe they're getting a raise, maybe it's hazard pay, or we want to pay them a couple dollars an hour more. It's up to the business. But if there's any changes, I want to inform them of those in the offer letter as well as the date that we're going to come back online. But if somebody at that point goes ahead and says, I'm going to stay on unemployment, I would consider that a resignation, and I would inform them they might want to think about that because they're probably going to be disqualified from their eligibility from their unemployment benefits for a voluntary quit. As well as the other points where coming to work is a social type of an environment. I think it's going to be healthy for a lot of people to get social again. If they had medical benefits and if they've been furloughed or they've been laid off, and they were COBRA, they were taken off the medical benefits at some point, maybe they want to think about staying out because they're going to, be turning down the opportunity to get on the medical benefits that they had and get reinstated to those plans. So there's a lot of things to consider. I think it's wise, like Pascal said, it's hard to hire good employees. It's difficult. And therefore, we want to try to communicate properly to bring them back if they're reluctant. We want them to feel secure that the workplace is going to be safe and healthy, and we want them back. But if they're going to be obstinate and they're going to make up excuses like that, then, I think you can take an aggressive line.
Okay, and again, though, I like the advice they're saying, just put an offer letter together. Everything's spelled out. You also can show that you had made this offer and this is what it was all about. So just documentation is important, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you brought up another interesting point. So we do get them back. Are there restrictions on how I, as a business owner, can insist upon my employees doing certain things? I'm talking about the masks, the distance, all that sort of thing. Am I, as an employer, exposed at all, or do I have to do that a certain way to make sure that I'm not doing something incorrectly? Where's the line drawn when it comes to what I can require my employees to do to be safe and for these health protocols? Pascal, why don't you take that?
Yeah, so I mean, if the important thing is to follow the government guidelines. You have CDC guidelines, you have EEOC guidelines, you have OSHA guidelines. OSHA takes a different view of what a mask is versus a respirator. From the last time I checked, a regular mask that you would wear, to go to the grocery store is not viewed as a respirator under OSHA standards. If it's a respirator, then OSHA, there are other standards that apply. But you have the right to actually wear the mask, wear the gloves. And I'm a firm believer that if they don't follow with those guidelines, you can send them home. And that's part of the safety, that's part of the risk. Now, there may be some, I mentioned the EEOC is because or even the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, there may be some employees who may need an accommodation because they cannot wear a mask. Or there may be some religious beliefs that kick in, and you have to take those on a case-by-case basis with respect to any accommodation with respect to that employee.
Eric, I saw you lean forward. You want to add to that?
Body language. No, I fully agree with what Mark was suggesting. We could add to this conversation, and I don't want to jump ahead too far, but
No, go for it.
Mandatory testing, requiring people to get tested before they come back. And right now, as things stand, you can do that. You can do that. There are some insurance companies that are actually going out and providing service that actually comes into the workplace, I am told, that will do testing. So, that's something that an employer has to weigh and take their own position on. Most of my clients at this point are not going down that path. But I think I like OSHA's recommendations. Mark or Pascal is absolutely correct, unless you're using an N95, which does fall under OSHA. If they're homemade masks, if they're surgical masks, they are not under the purview of Cal OSHA or Fed OSHA in the other 49 states at all.
But I want to make sure that we're hearing you correctly. So you're saying that if I wanted to require a mandatory, and I'm assuming you're talking about a COVID-19 test, before I'm going to come back, my employee's going to come back, they have to take a test. You can mandate that as a prerequisite for coming back for employment?
And I was told that by counsel yesterday with a couple of law firms. So I'll take that as substantive. And again, I'm not recommending that. I think if you're going to go down that path, I think that you want to get the proper guidance, and I think you should check with counsel.
Well, it's just helpful to know the parameters, and I appreciate you you mentioning that as part of that. Is there when it comes to requirements, I don't know if this falls into what you're talking about from a human resource standpoint. Do you guys have sort of the jurisdiction also over what this is going to mean for requirements on the customers coming in the door? The reason I ask that is because that's one of those things that can also dramatically impact the employee as well. How does that fit or not fit into this conversation today?
Well, I can answer.
Can you repeat that? I think I missed the beginning of that.
Well, go ahead, Eric. Go ahead and answer, and then I'll circle back. Go ahead.
Part of the returning to work plan, I strongly recommend, is not just managing how you're going to do this with employees, but it's also going to be with contact with the public, with customers, with vendors, with maintenance people, with delivery people, outside third-party services. You're going to want to limit the contact as much as is going to be efficient for your operations. And I think that's important to put into your return to work plan, as well as proper PPE and masks being made available, especially if if your workers are going to be coming in contact with either outside people coming in or going out in the field for deliveries, let's say.
Pascal, any additions to that?
And no, the only thing is that it's hard to keep social distancing in certain aspects and certain environments. You think of just the cashier who may handle an order at the grocery store. Those are the easiest examples. The person who's checking the bag and the cashier are not going to be 6 feet apart. It's just impossible. So there will be times where people will not be 6 feet apart, but you have to do your best to maintain that social distancing, to give the employees the necessary gear in order for them to have before you reopen. It's one thing to reopen, but if you don't have the hand sanitizing, you don't have the masks, you don't have the policies in place, that makes it very difficult to adhere to the requirements of safety and avoiding the risks and liability.
And how you manage the customers coming in the store, that is an employee safety issue as well. I mean, that's something that I think these business owners need to realize, right? Those things are connected, correct?
They are, and I think we'll keep drifting back in this conversation. I think our attendees today they're very concerned about liability, of course. And I think that once in the process of doing the planning for the return to work, that you document. Every business should document that they did a hazard assessment, first of all, that they took a look specific to COVID-19 and assessed what the opportunities, if you want to call it that, were for somebody to be catching, the COVID-19. And that in follow-up to the hazard assessment, that they did a report, and it doesn't need to be 10 pages, they did a report that was a preparedness plan that these were the potential hazards, and this is what our business is doing to mitigate and to keep everybody as healthy and protected as possible, and to document that. I think for some, that's going to become very, very important. For OSHA, it's a requirement. You need to do it anyway. A lot of small businesses don't follow that to the T, but in California, it falls under injury illness prevention programs, IIPPs, and it's strongly enforced. But I think that in that plan, it's going to be management of customers, like I said, and vendors and delivery people.
Well, and I think that, you mentioned about liability and exposure and things of that sort. I don't think there's anything we're going to talk about today that's not going to have that as an underlying thread. I mean, this is all about, minimizing that and smooth running of your operations. I want to let people know, by the way, we thank you for being a part of our HFA webinar today. We're talking about bringing employees back, and all of the questions are coming to our experts, Eric Martin and Pascal Benyamini, who are both HR experts, and they're really helping us wind through this. This is going to be recorded. It'll be available on our resource page, which is myhfa.org/COVID-19. Phenomenal resource page, updated consistently. We'll have this webinar plus others there available. So for you, your employees, please use it. It's there as a service. A couple of questions that came in, and I don't want to go too much farther before I get back to those. So if an employee that you're bringing back tests positive, what do you do? Can you require them? I know that we've seen that the standard, I think, has still been 14 days. Can you require that they can't come back to work for 14 days, or what do you do at that point?
I'll be happy to field that. So yes, they should be, first, that employee should be talking with their healthcare provider, and any advice that is coming to the employer should be coming from the healthcare provider. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of written documentation. There is two thoughts on that. One, some cities, some states have specifically prohibited the requirement that the employee get written documentation. Second, the healthcare providers are so overwhelmed that they may not be able to get to a written documentation. So if you're satisfied the employee is not lying to you, that they actually have tested positive, they need to stay home. They need to be quarantined, self-isolated for 14 days. I think even the CDC today says that. The CDC did change that a little bit a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago now, with respect to essential workers, and they crafted a little bit of an exception there. But for our purposes, I think 14 days is the right way to go. At least 14 days.
Eric, let me ask you this question. One of our webinar attendees says, how would you handle employees that refuse to return to work because they live with someone who's high risk?
Well, let me also, before directly answering that question, let me just add one thing to what Pascal said.
Sure, go for it.
I like recommending that if somebody tests positive, I want to know the date and the time for the diagnosis. And I want to know from them what the last 48 hours were like. I want to be able to do as much tracking on a short-term basis as possible. I want to know what workspace were they in and any coworkers that they might have interacted with in the last 48 hours. What does interaction mean? It means about 10 minutes at 6 feet apart. That's what's interaction. And so that I can do a little bit of tracking, find out, for other employees to communicate. It's not my duty, and I'm not recommending that anybody tell people the name of the person that went home or who has told us that they've tested positive either. We can work around that. Unless there was a staffing company, that would be one of the only exceptions I could think about if you had temps from a staffing company. But now back to the other question. I'm at home, and the question mark is, I'm around somebody who has tested positive.
Well, I'm around somebody who is at high risk, and I'm going to go back into the workforce. And they're just saying, I don't want to be exposed to that because I don't want to bring this home. How does somebody handle that? Because I know that's come up. I've actually seen issues of that already that have been noted in stories and things.
But first of all, I'd take a look to see if telework or telecommuting was an option at all. That's the first thing. If it is, terrific. You know, I would recommend choosing that right away as an option. If that's not an option, which it is not for many, I am going to, well, Pascal, is that an FFCRA eligibility? Right.
Yeah, I think it would be. Yeah, that's where it could very well be an FFCRA, and they would get 2/3 pay up to 80 hours. And then after that, it would be an unpaid leave of absence, possibly, depending on the size of the employer. They could even be a regular FMLA at that point. But we would really need to know a little bit more about that. But just the way you described the question, I think it would trigger the FFCRA.
Okay, good, really terrific advice on that one. That's something we've heard coming up a bit because, you know, again, and I think that's pretty valid. There's people that know that they've got somebody at home that's compromised, and they don't want to be the person who brings the virus home if possible. So I appreciate that. So now, if your employees are back, you've got this set up, you know, you start moving things back to work. What if someone after they come back to work gets sick, at least exhibiting symptoms that could be connected to this virus? What do you as a business owner do in that case?
You want me to address that?
You can jump in freely. You don't need Eric's permission. You can jump in whenever you want.
So I'll pick up where Eric left off on that. Is I think it would the interview with that individual now is critical because you have to find out who they interacted with. And I know Eric mentioned 10 minutes. Just an anecdote, when all this started back in March, we were talking about like 3 minutes at 6 feet, right? Then it went to 5 minutes. Now it's to 10 minutes to even up to 30 minutes. So, but I agree with Eric, you take the conservative approach, 10 minutes, and you interview those people, and those people may actually be quarantined as well. So once you have a handle on the people that you have tracked down that may have interacted with this person, in the retail setting, it may very well be customers. So now you have a potential obligation to reach out to customers and let them know that somebody at the company, at the store, tested positive. So that's one issue. Then the next step, or one of the next steps, aside from talking with the individuals, would be to get a deep cleaning done of the facility, because now it's possible that it's on a surface somewhere. And even if it's not, as an optics standpoint, you want to show to your employees and to your customers that you're taking this seriously, that you're taking the necessary precautions by doing the deep cleaning. And it may very well require you to shut down, get an outside service to come in to do this, and then reopen.
Well, and Eric, I'm going to let you jump in on the second half of this one, because now I'm hearing you talking liability in my ear, and I'm thinking about, holy smokes, now I'm not only do I have an employee that thinks they got sick in the store, now I'm having to call customers that may have been exposed. Unless in this next package that they're talking about some liability shield for retailers, what does that mean for me as the business owner when that happens?
I think the hopes and dreams of the liability shield are, we're not seeing that yet. So again, we're doing everything preventative, and we are going to have a plan to how to react if this becomes an issue. That being said, in the interview of the person that Pascal was talking about, I think it's appropriate to try to, if we can, isolate the area. If it's a warehouse, I say we shut the warehouse down for 24 hours and we do a deep cleaning. If we can do that, not the entire business necessarily. If we cannot pinpoint actual location, or if this diagnosed employee had been all over the facility, I think a 24-hour shutdown, and I believe that's a CDC recommendation right now, would be appropriate, and the deep cleaning with the janitorial.
Now, Pascal just used the term optics, and I think that's something that's sometimes under talked about, but that's really important. I hear both what you're saying is optics here too. If you as a business owner are aware of this, then all of your actions subsequent to that, I'm assuming you're saying, need to be purposeful and need to show that you're taking it seriously moving forward. That may be your best hedge at the moment to protect your business. Pascal, what do you think about that?
Yes, because if you start on the wrong foot by not showing that you're taking it seriously, I think you're looking at lawyers just lining up outside your door to bring claims. I think if you're taking the necessary measures, you may still have a few lawyers standing outside, but at the very least, you're mitigating as much as possible, not only with your own employees, but with potential customers and vendors.
Okay. Now, Eric, you kind of ventured into a little bit of sort of HIPAA territory a little bit ago when you talked about, date and time of diagnosis and those kind of questions, et cetera. Are you, as employees are coming back and coming into the space, are we allowed now, based upon this situation, this crisis situation, to quiz them a little bit deeper about underlying health conditions they might have? I'm starting to feel like we're really tapping into personal health information here, but is this something that has changed a bit based on this, or do you still have to steer clear?
Well, you've got two issues. You bring up HIPAA, or healthcare privacy, as well as just general confidentiality issues, which could drift into other parts of legal protections. After the COVID-19 started, the federal government, the EEOC more specifically, started to simply put, ease up and give employers a lot more latitude in terms of being available or to ask more questions. The HIPAA privacy protection is going to be strictly on the employee side with their doctors and underlying health issues. I think my question or my advice to an employer is to keep a general question as far as, and you can utilize this in many situations. This is when we're coming back to work. These are our protocols. This is what we're going to be doing. This is what your job is going to be. This is what our start date is. Are there any reasons that you feel that you wouldn't be able to adhere to our guidelines, or are there any challenges that you see why you wouldn't want to come back? That's fairly open-ended and gives them an opportunity to express anything. We haven't talked about temperature taking either.
Let's do it.
And I'll drag that into the discussion here because it applies with temperature taking and record keeping.
Mm-hmm.
Temperature taking, is it legal to do? Yes, it is. The EEOC at the federal level is okay with doing that. So we've got 6 or 10 employees lined up outside the door in the morning. We've got a designated individual who has been trained and who has proper PPE, personal protective equipment, to guard that person taking the temperatures. They have what's popular now, probably a thermoscan, where you just hold it up and take the individual's temperature. They're going to want to log the temperature. Otherwise, because later on, I don't want some plaintiff's attorney to say that I didn't do it that day, therefore somebody could have brought the virus in. Temperatures are not a panacea, I'll say. They're not going to be a guarantee that somebody does or does not. Any temperature that's 100.3 is what recommend right now, where you're sending them home, and you do it with dignity and you do it with privacy. I don't recommend that you have employees with 101 fever and you have them walk past everybody else, to go home. I think if logistically or the physical environment permits, that you pull them aside and say, you know what, you've got 101 fever and we need you to go home and take it from there. And we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes, I'm sure. But the confidentiality with the record keeping for the temperatures, is another component to what we're talking about here. If somebody is positive, if somebody says they've been with somebody, like I mentioned earlier, we're not spreading their name around. We're not doing that.
Right. Well, and the thing that I want to make sure that everybody heard, and this has been pretty specific for the last number of weeks now, from a regulatory standpoint, you as an employer can take the temperature and insist on taking the temperature of your employees before they come to work. So that's not iffy at the moment. That's one of the few things that's pretty darn cut and dried at the moment. As far as customers, different ball game, I realize. And by the way, just one little nugget, since I'm married to a healthcare professional, the 100.3, if people are trying to wonder why is that so random, you may not know this, but a temperature below that is normal. Even if at the moment you could be running 100-degree temperature right now, 100.0, and that's considered within a normal body temperature range. 100.3 is when you start getting into what's truly called a fever. You can't call that other stuff a fever, which is kind of, there you go. There's your little useless nugget for this program. Wanted to mention that. Now let me ask you this then. So can I just get it from both of you? Would you suggest taking temperature of employees in this environment right now? Would you suggest to anybody do that? Pascal, would you say absolutely do that with your employees, or is that?
No, not. Yeah, I wouldn't say absolutely. I think it's really a decision business to business because the CDC has been very clear that this virus is being spread asymptomatically. So temperatures may not necessarily give you the information you need. If you do it, I would couple it with additional screening questions along the lines of what Eric mentioned, but I think you can also add, do you have any respiratory problems? Do you have any, do you have a sore throat? Do you have coughing? I would literally go on the CDC website and pull down the latest list of COVID-19 symptoms. And I would ask the employee about those symptoms and then make a assessment as a whole and not in a vacuum.
Yes, and matter of fact, I'm really glad you said that because we have a number of handouts that are available on the right side of the screen today, and one of those is a COVID-19 employee return questionnaire that'll be very helpful in this instance. And to your point, as long as you're asking questions about specific things, it's less open-ended and not making it sound like it's an invasive personal question, more a question of just letting us know. I like that a lot. Eric, are you in agreement with that? And first of all, let me ask you that. You're in agreement with what he just said? Okay.
Yes.
Here's the next question. Should you require your employees to wear masks while on the job? These are questions that have come through from companies, and so I'm just asking them that bluntly. Would you do that? Would you suggest it?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to qualify my answer. There's a big difference between mandatory masks and voluntary wearing. There's a huge, and that's an OSHA difference. That's a different a horse of a different stripe. I think that employers are going to be smart and well advised to keep supplies around a PPE. I think the question also came in yesterday, I'll add, do we have to pay for these if somebody brings a mask in? And the answer is, if it's mandatory, then the employer is going to burden the cost for the PPE, whether it's gloves or whether it's masks or face shields, eye protection, any of those. However, in practical application, I think it's fair to recommend that, as a business, it's good employee relations if I just pick up the cost of these. They're fairly minimal, and I should have supplies around. And again, from the liability standpoint, if I have to try to defend later on, I want to show that I've done everything possible to prevent people from becoming ill. That's going to be we call it an affirmative defense.
Okay. When in doubt, get it in writing. Be specific. Don't leave a lot of things up to the imagination. I want to mention, by the way, it looks like Pascal has had a signal issue. I see we have Caprice up here, but we'll try to get him back as soon as we can. So Eric, let me ask you this one. This is a pretty specific question, but I love some of these because they get us into different areas, and you tend to really kind of see within these things. This question came in and said, we're ready to call some but not all of our employees back. We know that some have kids at home because schools are closed, and those employees would be eligible for the extended paid family leave. Can we choose not to call them back?
Well, there's going to be different circumstances. So I want to talk to the employee, especially the good ones. I want to find out what their circumstances are. They might have changed in the last 2 weeks. Again, with OSHA guidelines coming out about child care facilities, they've got pretty good guidelines on that. And so that's going to become available as a resource to people. However, if they choose to tell me that there's nobody else to take care of the children, and they've got another 4 weeks on their emergency FMLA under the Families First, I'm going to leave them alone. I'm not going to try to pressure them to come back. They're on the 2/3 pay. It's not like an unemployment benefit situation. It's totally different. This is a protected leave right now under those regulations.
Okay, Pascal, we still have you, I think, on audio. Can you hear us?
Yes, I apologize. My signal went out, but I dialed back in. So.
Well, no, not a problem. Do you want to weigh in on that as well? Did you hear the question?
No, I did not. Can you please repeat that? Thank you.
Sure, because it's an interesting one. So somebody is starting to call employees back, but one of them has school-age children. Schools are not open yet, so they would qualify for family leave. And the question was, can I then decide not to call them back? It's a little bit sticky because you've now engaged them to find that out. We're just trying to figure out what makes the most sense in handling something like that. That's a question from one of our retailers.
Yeah, I think that once you call the employee back, you're telling them that you have work for them and they need to come back. And that employee says that they cannot. Then it triggers the FFCRA. Perhaps Eric mentioned this. One option would be if the employee can work remotely, telework. Mm-hmm. If not, then they would be eligible for the 80 hours under the FFCRA. Now, if the employer is less than 50 employees, there is always the exemption that they can try to rely on and say that the FFCRA does not apply to them. So that's an avenue that perhaps the employer should pursue in that situation. But otherwise, I think once you invite them back to work and they say they cannot work, I think it triggers the FFCRA.
Okay, fair enough. There's an interesting question that came through, and I think this is kind of, we're sitting here talking about all these kind of negative potentials here, and I kind of like this one. So I'm going to throw this one out to both of you, and Eric, I'll have you start first. So how in this environment, this is we're talking right now about the part of HR that's the real sticky pieces and the stuff that people don't like to deal with. But let's talk about this. In this environment, what are the opportunities to galvanize your workforce, to bring a sense of purpose among them? What are, I'm assuming we don't want to forget that part of it. We don't want to get so caught up in all of the health and safety protocols that we forget about the fact that we've got employees that you want to have feeling like they're a connected part of your team. So in the midst of this thing, how do you manage that part of it?
People call it the new normal. That seems to be the soundbite going around. I guess there's a lot of truth to that. When you call back employees, I think it's a proud moment because we're all together in this, and I think it's a signal that we're moving forward. But we're also, it's a great opportunity for employee relations. It truly is. And I've always said for over 30 years that you can't lose when you're talking about safety, because no matter what it is with safety, it shows that we care about you, plain and simple, because we always have a number one responsibility that supersedes any other motivation of the business, and that is a healthy and safe workplace for you to work in. And, and I think obviously employers are stretching to do as much as they as feasible as they can to help employees. Some of the stories I've heard over the phone over the last 7 weeks.
That may be Pascal's audio.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay on audio for now. I tried reconnecting,
Okay.
but I'll stay on audio.
Yeah,
we're
just, the webinar does not want to see you apparently, but hearing you is good. That's cool. Eric, I'm sorry, keep going.
Some of the stories that we've heard over the last month and a half have just been I call them heart-wrenching, because I've just personally been so impressed at how employers have handled how much they care about their employees and put the employees in their situations during these times ahead of every and done so much for their employees. So it's a great opportunity bringing back that they know that these people are changing their habits that they've had for a lifetime. And now we're saying we're playing by kind of a new set of rules, but we want you to be comfortable with that because we have a plan. We can adapt. We care about you. We're going to move ahead and we're going to get through this.
Would you also, Pascal, I'll let you take this part of that, which I think that was great. I mean, I think we need to see opportunity within all of this. Would you also potentially involve the employees in the safety conversations? Here's what we put forward as we bring it back to work. Help us make things better. Would you suggest something along those lines too as a really good way of building that morale and building that connection with an employee?
Yes, I think a lot of employees are going to appreciate the fact that they will be involved in the safety. A lot of them will expect it as well because they understand that many of them will want to come back to work, and many of them will want to help the business be profitable, whether they've been an employee who's worked for a year or someone who's been there a lot longer. So bringing employees into the mix is very important. But I would say this: I think the employer needs to put a plan in place and present it to the employees, and then ask for feedback, as opposed to from the get-go just tell employees, what do you think? I think it's important to take the lead in putting a plan in place, and then as part of the training in the plan, seek feedback from the employees.
Yeah, and I think, Eric, I really liked what you said too, is that we have to realize that the world is changing, and the life of these employees is changing, and this is the time to reinvest in them to a certain degree, and include them, and not just think about protocols. Those are important, but also there's people on the other end of those protocols. So I love the fact that we're talking about some opportunities here. We've got a couple of more minutes, and I'm just curious, and I hate to go from positive to something that just kind of was mind-blowing. And Pascal, you mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, and we talked about it in the last couple of days here. You said there's actually a concern that there are some people who are not happy staying in unemployment, who want to come back to work so badly that they would mask or not admit to symptoms just to get on the job. That's not supposition. You said there's been cases of that, or there are concerns about that, and tell us about that and how that should be managed.
Yeah, so I've heard from clients where employees who that may not necessarily be an unemployment issue because there is work for them to do, and they're essential businesses and they've been open throughout this period. Employees are coming to work with an illness, whether they're coughing, whether they're respiratory problems, and they're saying, I'm not sick. Whether it's a psychological issue for the employee that they're denying the fact that they're sick, or it's another issue, which is I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I cannot afford being off of work, and I want to work. So because that employee may be providing for a number of people in their family. So and I have clients who have plants and facilities along the California-Mexico border, where these individuals come cross the border every day. So I'm talking from Central California all the way to the Mexican border, with clients saying that we have employees who are sick but are still showing up to work, and we have to turn them away. Now, fortunately, we don't see a whole lot of that, but we have seen that, and because employees want to work and they're living paycheck to paycheck.
Eric, let me ask you, we've covered a ton of ground today, and I don't want to leave anything out. Are there any other little nuggets you'd like to share while you've got everybody's ear?
I think we've covered the high points. I would advise, you've got some handouts that have additional points on there of recommendations. Always subject to change. I think just don't forget also, and I'll go even a little bit more negative, like Mark was saying, which is the contingency plan. Part of your plan, unfortunately, has to be a contingency plan, which means that if for some reason you get your business back up and running and everything is going fine, but suddenly in fall or beginning of next year or whenever, we have, unfortunately, have to revisit another increase in infections. I think you're going to be looking at staffing challenges. You're going to go in reverse at that point. And you're not going to know everything to put in a contingency plan. I don't think any business or owner or CEO would know. I think that you just have to include that somewhere at the back of the plan, and hopefully it will never have to be implemented.
Well, I think for me, the biggest threads, takeaways from what we've talked about today is obviously have a plan going in. You talked about just now making it flexible because we don't know what's going to be happening in the future. Also, there's a lot of complexity there because you guys have mentioned in getting some regulatory input from OSHA, EEOC, CDC, ADA. Holy smokes! There's many different aspects of this, which is why the handouts are so important. We've got fact sheets, planning guides. Those are on the right side of the screen. You want to make sure to get those. So a great plan. Also, just be very aware that anything you do, document. Did I kind of hit the high points there, Eric and Pascal? Is that about right?
You did.
I'm just getting nods.
Yes, you are.
Pascal, we cannot see you nod. You're not. We can't see you.
No, I am nodding. Yes, the only thing I would add is don't rush to open. I know people are really ready to get back. I would say take that extra few days to get these plans into place, review the wonderful materials that you are talking about, and that you posted, and have a plan ready. And you're not going to get to know every contingency. You're going to have to deal with it as it comes, like we have been for the last 2.5 months or 3 months now.
So do it right. All right, let me make some important reminders here. If you visit, you see it on the screen, myhfa.org/COVID-19. We have all sorts of resources there. Plus, this webinar will be put up in the next few hours. So anybody you want to have listen in and be able to see this, please send them that direction. We'll be sending you a link to that as well. Also, this conversation can continue. We have the HFA Retailer to Retailer Facebook group. Please seek it out, and it's a great place to talk directly back and forth with retailers. Again, we've got 4 handouts that you can download on the right side of the screen. Those are available. They are an employee return questionnaire, a work planning guide, also all sorts of fact sheets to really make sure that you are up for all of that. And finally, I want to mention to you that next week at this very same time slot, we're going to be taking a look at, after you bring all the employees back, we're going to take a look at really what this new customer journey, customer experience is going to look like. And one of the people that will be joining us is Keith Koenig, the president of City Furniture in Florida, a top 100 that does some amazing work. And as well as we're going to have a number of other retailers are going to really tell us some great best practices as we move forward to, I know you said the new normal. Eric, there's no such thing as normal anymore. We're redefining that on a daily basis. Our thanks to Eric Martin, Senior Consultant with ACG Consulting, also Pascal Benyamini, who is a partner at Faegre, Drinker, Biddle, and Reith. We thank you guys both for joining us and for giving us some great information today and fielding a myriad of questions. And we just want to say to everybody listening, we continue to bring you the things you need. Let us know. We want to answer the questions you need to have answered so that we can help you restart the business and get back to doing what you love to do. I'm Mark Schumacher, Executive Vice President here at HFA. We will see you next time.